What's up, guys? It's KB. Make sure you subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. Click the bell icon down below so you don't miss a single video from us. And thanks for tuning in to another video from Underground Sports Philadelphia. Now let's get into it.
Philadelphia, baby, you're going to love it. Best sports fans in the world. Actually, the worst, but that's what makes them the best.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the first post-win Eagles Enemies episode of the 2022 season. Eagles Enemies, obviously, always presented by Underground Sports Philadelphia. I'm your host, Kyle Bennett. Eagles coming off a big win against the Detroit Lions, squeaked by in that one, beating the Lions 38-35. Jalen Hurts looked great. A.J. Brown looked phenomenal. And now the Eagles are getting set for their 2022 home opener on Monday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings, a team we have come to have quite some history with as Eagles fans over the past 5 or so years. And there's no better way to enjoy Vikings week than with my good friend Arif Hasan from The Athletic, Minnesota. He covers the Vikings over there. So make sure you're checking everything out that Arif is doing for The Athletic. Listen to his podcast, Norse Code, and he's on the Locked On Podcast Network as well with Minnesota Sports. And this Eagles game is going to be a doozy, so we're going to chop it up with Arif in just a little bit. But make sure you guys are following us on the socials at UndergroundPHI on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me on Twitter at KBIZZL311. Subscribe to the podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Underground Sports Philadelphia, and you'll be able to get every single episode of Eagles Enemies in that podcast feed all throughout the season. And, of course, subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. You get full video episodes of Eagles Enemies all season long. Video form of Eagles Enemies is now live for Season 5. And very first time Arif will be in video form for the people. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Smash that like button. Ring the bell icon so you don't miss a single second of the content. Comment down below your thoughts on this matchup. And without any further ado, here is myself and Arif Hasan breaking down Eagles Vikings for Eagles Enemies. Season 5, Episode 5. Let's get into it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. The Eagles get a big W week 1 against the Hard Knocks hyped up Detroit Lions, and we are back for the home opener, Monday Night Football on ESPN. And there's no better way to talk about a matchup with the Minnesota Vikings than with my good friend Arif Hasan from The Athletic. Arif, welcome back to the show. And I think there's only one way to start this episode of Eagles Enemies than with me claiming you were correct about one Carson Wentz.
It's been a 2-year victory lap for me, so I'm really glad that we've been able to acknowledge it. And finally, together, the two of us can cheer against him, right?
Absolutely. He's in enemy territory now, and
you're obligated.
We see him next week at FedEx Field, and hopefully no guardrails fall down like they did last year while they try to sabotage Jalen Hurts. But you were completely correct about Carson Wentz, and he's an egomaniac and no longer our quarterback.
All right. Well, I guess I'll have to wait until next week, but let's keep this one in reserve. Go Birds.
There we go. So the Minnesota Vikings, they get a big W last week against the Green Bay Packers, and obviously chomping at the bit were those defensive players from the Minnesota Vikings. You wrote about it in the for The Athletic, with their pass rush coming up big against Aaron Rodgers. A lot of defensive improvements for this Vikings team over the offseason, now with an offensive-minded head coach. What impressed you the most last week about this Vikings defense that, got some upgrades and, some new life into it over the offseason?
How versatile they appear to be, which is going to be important because it's going to be an entirely different offensive challenge for them to face. But, their ability to kind of, put defenders in basically every position, to have somebody who one snap is lined up as one technique at the nose tackle, and then the next snap is lined up as a 6 technique as an outside defensive end, having that capability, while also, mixing in with different fronts. They had a penny front, they had a dime front. We might see, if Lucine is healthy, we might see some, additional safeties on the field against Philadelphia. Certainly there's all kinds of approaches that they've been able to take based on down and distance and personnel and whatever, what have you, so that they can have a variety of answers to various problems.
And obviously, new coach in the fold for the Vikings this year, moving on from Mike Zimmer in the offseason. What impressed you about, this new coaching staff and, what they were able to kind of accomplish against obviously a heated rival in the Green Bay Packers, and kind of just come out and continue this Minnesota Vikings hype train that I feel like three teams this offseason have really gained like that darling status of the media, and it's the Vikings, the Eagles, and always the Los Angeles Chargers, who everybody loves year in and year out, and somehow always fail to make the playoffs. But what were your initial takes from Game 1 from Kevin O'Connell?
Well, I thought that there were a lot of things that he did well. Some things that he could have improved on. I think that the second fourth down, a 4th and 2, that he could have gone for, he chose not to. That probably would have raised his status among the analytic types. And there was like a missed challenge here that actually the one where he went for it on 4th and 1, I think he should have challenged on 3rd down, decided not to. Just very small things from a game management perspective. They've hired someone specifically to provide him with live in-game game management feedback. So I want to know kind of how that process is going. But for the most part, that element was impressive to me, because when you see a lot of these coaches, this happened to Mike Zimmer too in 2014, you see a lot of these coaches who are play callers that are now becoming head coaches for the first time and are dealing with the multitude of factors that a play caller doesn't have to deal with. And then on top of that, you're calling plays, right? The ability to kind of keep the game going and making sure that everybody was on kind of the same page, not having to call timeouts because you didn't get the call in time, not having to panic at any moment and kind of shift strategies because you just weren't paying enough attention to this one particular area of coaching that you need to pay attention to. Just kind of always being on task and finding ways to resolve a lot of the problems that might come with being a first-time head coach. I thought that just it came out of the gates swinging, which was really nice to see.
Now there was a trade involving the Eagles and the Vikings right leading into the season, and it involved a wide receiver that I think more people couldn't stand than they couldn't stand Carson Wentz, and that's Jalen Reagor. Do you think he's going to be a key contributor to this Vikings team? I think there's some sick, twisted irony that he and Justin Jefferson are teammates now. And for a small stint, DK Metcalf and JJ Arcega-Whiteside were teammates with the Seahawks before they realized he can't play football. But what are your thoughts on Jalen Reagor in this Vikings offense and, as a punt returner, kick returner type of player for this team?
Yeah, I think that if he sees the field offensively, it won't be because the Vikings will, kind of want him given an opportunity for revenge or anything like that. I think he'll have earned it from just being, the 4th best receiver. The Vikings, when they did go 3 receiver, only played 3 receivers last week, and so we didn't actually see much of the depth there. But they only have 5 receivers on the roster, and in my mind, one of them, the other Jalen Naylor, is basically a special teams only guy, so it didn't really surprise me. But as he learns more of the playbook, we might see more of him on the field, maybe only 4 or 5 snaps or something like that. And in that capacity, if he ends up becoming kind of a big part of the story of this game, it's probably catastrophic for the Eagles. Unless, we see some mistakes like he did with the Eagles, like, a muffed punt, right? Then that could be, a story that would benefit the Eagles. But for the most part, it very much seems like the kind of player that he is and the way that he's approached kind of the whole saga surrounding Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor, the pick with the Eagles has been nothing but positive. Again, we don't really have it. Like, if the season goes sour, like, how does his attitude change? I don't know. But, my understanding is that, I was just talking to Bo Wolf, the Eagles writer at The Athletic. It sounded like, unquestionably Jalen Reagor had his best training camp so far, right? Entering this one before he got traded. And, he had a lot of major life events, happen to him this year that really refocused him. And I think you can tell when interacting with him that, even though I didn't know who the person he was before, he kind of wants to distance himself from that person, that he wants to approach it with a level of seriousness he hadn't. And so, from that perspective, I'm definitely rooting for him. I know that he had a bunch of bad interactions with fans, that he wasn't that great in the locker room. And it sounded like, hey, this is kind of like a weird litmus test, but you're going to be in the same locker room as Justin Jefferson's taking a pick after you. Obviously he can't control that somebody who's on the trajectory to be in the Hall of Fame was picked right after him. Like, that's not his fault, right? And so how he kind of approaches that is interesting, and he viewed it kind of as sort of this like divine blessing, this kind of faith bit, which is however you want to do it, right? So as long as you can take something and turn it into a positive. And so it very much seems like this might be kind of one of those win-win-win scenarios where the Eagles get something out of it, the Vikings get something out of it, and Jalen Reagor gets something out of it.
Looking at this Vikings offense, there's a bunch of weapons, obviously, from Dalvin Cook to Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and then you have Kirk Cousins, or as I like to call him, Kirk Coupons. He's 2-9 on Monday Night Football in his career, which is the worst mark of active NFL quarterbacks on Monday Night Football. So that's an interesting take there going into week 2. But also, the Eagles since 2016 have not won a week 2 game, so something's got to give there. It's just fantastic scheduling by the NFL. Wow. The offensive line for this Vikings team, what are your expectations for them as they face this Eagles defensive line that hopefully Jonathan Gannon takes some advice from Twitter and realizes that you moved up in the draft to take a 300-pound refrigerator known as Jordan Davis to stuff the run and plays him more. But the Eagles defensive line versus the Vikings offensive line, what are some things you're looking for there in that matchup that I think is going to be a big key to this game?
Well, to pick something famous in Philadelphia lore, I'll quote Rocky. Prediction. Pain. This is not going to be good for the Vikings, I don't think. The offensive line defensive line matchup massively favors, especially along the interior of the Eagles. And obviously it depends on how much they want to play Jordan Davis, but I just don't anticipate a Jordan Davis Garrett Bradbury matchup going well for the Vikings. I think that it spells disaster. Not that like Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox are easy matchups or anything like that, but when you've got somebody like Jordan Davis who played as well as he did in Week 1 against a much better interior front for sure, Detroit, that you should take advantage of some of these opportunities when they show up. And so that's going to be the biggest, like out of all the matchups here, right? Like I'm confident, for example, that Justin Jefferson is going to, get his. I'm confident, that Dalvin Cook will find ways to create some space. I'm confident that, Daniel Hunter will have, an opportunity to make some waves against Jordan Mailata. But, of all the matchups that worry me, it's this one, right? It's this might be the biggest mismatch on either side. It's the Eagles' defensive interior line versus the Vikings' offensive interior line. Ed Ingram didn't have a very good game against the Packers either, and it just so happens that the Vikings are going up against a great nose tackle after great nose tackle after great nose tackle early in the season, right? And after the Eagles, it's the Lions, and after the Lions, it's the Bears, I think, who've always found a way to generate great nose tackles. So that'll be tough until they finally go to London and face kind of a lighter front. So that's going to be kind of the biggest area that they're going to test over the coming weeks. And I think this is, I'm not saying it's the biggest test out of all of them. In fact, out of the 3 weeks, the Eagles interior might be the least worst matchup just because of how rarely they seem to want to play Jordan Davis. But Kenny Clark is one of the 2 best nose tackles in the NFL, and the Eagle and the Lions have an insanely good run stopping front. So it's no insult to Jordan Davis or the Eagles to say that this is kind of maybe third on that test, but I expect it'll be a disaster at points because of how good that front is.
And if the interior of this Vikings offensive line can somehow create time for Kirk Cousins to get the ball out to, those wide receivers on the outside, what are your thoughts on just the matchups, knowing that, now the Eagles actually have 2 formidable corners for the first time since like 2004, with, Darius Slay on one side, James Bradbury on the other. Bradbury obviously had the pick 6 against the Vikings, and then safety-wise, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is back there for the Eagles now, and Marcus Epps. So a formidable secondary going up against a really talented wide receiver group as well.
Yeah, Marcus Epps, that one still burns me, man. I liked him a lot in camp. I can't believe they did that.
He's great. He's really turned into he went from viscerally get him off the field a couple years ago to turning into just a very solid startable player.
He was like the second safety at Wyoming, right? Because Andrew Wingard was the one that everybody liked. That was just crazy. But it's a very good secondary. The thing is, I was asked this the other day, hey, is there any corner that you would trust could lock up Justin Jefferson one-on-one, right? And lock up, maybe they give up 30 yards or something like that. And historically there are, right? Darrelle Revis 2009 for sure. Richard Sherman 2013 for sure. Patrick Peterson, during when he wasn't playing for the Vikings, essentially for sure. They're definitely corners that Champ Bailey, right? For sure, right at their peaks. I don't know that there is a corner in the NFL that's playing at that level right now. Right after Jalen Ramsey started looking a little bit more mortal, I don't know that there is one. Right, and so you're not going to get 180 yards every single game for Jefferson, but certainly he's always at risk to get 100. Right, and that's terrifying, I think. So I think that this is going to be one of the better secondaries that they play again for the next couple of weeks, especially now that the Saints are weakened by having lost, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, of all things. It's going to be a while since they faced a secondary that's good. In fact, the Packers secondary is probably the only one that was kind of intimidating on the schedule, and they still were able to get a couple of yards there. So I expect that this is going to be kind of the most difficult one for Jefferson, but I still think that he'll be a good risk of getting 100 plus. And then Adam Thielen only got like 3-4 targets against the Packers, and KJ Osborne, who I think a lot of people are sleeping on, is potentially just as good as Thielen right now. Sorry, he only got like 3 or 4 targets, and so I think all of these receivers. Well, whoever's in the slot against C.J. Gardner-Johnson might have a little bit more difficulty, but I think all of these receivers will find ways to get theirs, especially because the Eagles, they trust that secondary a lot.
It's so weird and so frustrating.
The zones that they're being tasked with to carry are enormous, right? Because it's a lot of like we're playing a zone beneath these 5 rushers, right? And so they're taking a guy out of coverage a lot, and I don't know if there's any like for the skill set of attacking a specific zone or finding areas in a zone. This is the group of receivers I would take. Like if we were talking about man-to-man coverage, I might take the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle group in Cedric Wilson in Miami, right? Just because of the way they match up man-to-man and their specific and unique skill sets. But in terms of attacking zones and destroying kind of the seams and breaking them open or flooding zones or baiting receivers baiting corners to get out of their zone. I mean, this is a remarkable group. Plus an offensive mind whose sole job has been over the past couple of years to break zone defenses. And so, everything's like a matchup zone, so it's not like quite the same thing, but I would expect that this is going to be pretty challenging for the Eagles secondary. And because Cousins is fine against the blitz, it's when pressure actually arrives that he becomes a problem. But just blitzing itself, he's fine. I would suggest to the Eagles to cool it a little bit and play 4-person front a little bit more often, which would take Jordan Davis off the field, but maybe figure out a way to make that work. I think that wouldn't be too hard. But figure out a way to just rush for and have a secondary just willing to kind of crowd coverages and make things a little bit difficult for Cousins to read. Because the key to getting pressure on Cousins is not to send more pressure; it's to make him wait. Right, to make that pocket last a long time. The best way to do that is to have people in coverage. So that's probably the best way to do it, but I still think Jefferson's going to eat.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, if any team out there, maybe even the Broncos, want to reconsider their head coaching hiring this past offseason and go with the guy they turned away, known as Jonathan Gannon, and just want to hire him now, totally fine with that because, my goodness, it is one of the most mind-boggling things how he just fails to make adjustments in game, and I just don't understand how he's getting all this hype to be a future head coach as soon as next season. It was getting interviews this past offseason. I was like, take him away.
He was a dark horse candidate for the Vikings, actually. He was on that list. Yeah,
it's mind blowing that you give him all this talent now this offseason, he still doesn't know how to use it.
What do you mean, Jared Goff isn't supposed to put up 35?
Opening play of 2022. Here, let DeAndre Swift run 51 yards all over you. Genius. Absolute genius. I think one of the more interesting pickups for the Vikings this offseason was going and getting Za'Darius. I think that was a huge pickup. What did you take away from just his Vikings debut against his former team? And then what are your expectations for what he's going to bring to the table, for the rest of the season for this defense?
My dude was amped up. Good Lord. Yeah. The Vikings have always had some level of incredibly vocal personality on their defense, like at a unique way, from like John Randall to Jared Allen to Everson Griffin, and now it seems like Za'Darius Smith is like filling that role. They're all different kinds and amounts of unhinged, I guess, to use maybe an insensitive word, but just a lot of energy that they're bringing onto the field. And Smith very much has kind of stepped into that role of providing that kind of energy. It's not the same thing as leadership. I want, like, Everson Griffin brought a ton of energy. I would not have described him as necessarily a locker room leader, maybe a tone setter, right? But, Jared Allen was a leader, right? And it seems like Zadarius Smith seems to be able to provide both of those elements. That's kind of the soft and tangible stuff. In terms of what he provides on the field, it actually fills a hole that I think was left by Anthony Barr's departure. And by that, I mean, of course, they're playing completely different positions. I don't want to suggest that a 3-4 outside linebacker is the same as an inside linebacker, but rather the ability to kind of move around the formation and create opportunities for everybody else to get one-on-one matchups because of their threat to rush from any angle. Even though Anthony Barr did not actually blitz as often as people seem to think, and Zadarius Smith is always rushing, right? As that is his primary responsibility. His movement ability to play, opposite the center, opposite the guard, opposite the tackle, opposite the tight end, at baiting running backs into changing their protections and stuff like that, enables other people to get the pressures that they're going to get, which it was interesting because he was a pressure leader in 2019. Typically that role does not always get you a ton of pressures. It just helps other people out. But, he was able to get pressure. He was able to get a sack in this game. And his strength is extra. There's one of the first snaps of the game. He takes, who was playing guard? Jake Hansen is the backup guard for the Packers. And just takes him by the collar and just shoves him into Aaron Rodgers. It was just a remarkable way to begin the game. And I suspect it'll be a little bit harder against the Eagles. I'm just going to put that out there, but there's a lot of versatility that he brings that's going to make it really difficult for offenses to set protections. I mean, he was kind of washed out a little bit in the run game against the Packers. That is important to note. And the Eagles, I suspect, will want to take advantage of being able to run to the outside. That seems to be something that they're uniquely good at in the NFL right now. But as a pass rusher, I mean, he's been fantastic.
Two-parter here, because I think since the last time you were on the show, Patrick Peterson was still in Arizona. So I wanted to get your take, as a member of the media and everything. What's it like covering a player who has his own platform, like Patrick Peterson has his podcast that he does? And, how do you guys in the media kind of dissect that in a way to kind of, take away anything he may mention on that podcast per se? And then how do you view him in this matchup, whether he lines up against A.J. Brown, who had a record-breaking day in Eagles franchise history last week, or Devontae Smith, who was shut out of the game and didn't have a single reception?
Weird. Just weird.
So strange.
So to that first question, there are just some members of the media that will listen to every episode of that podcast. I'm not one of them, just because my the way I handle my beat is just a little bit different, because we have somebody at The Athletic on the Vikings who does a lot of the newsier day-to-day stuff, that wants to cover kind of like transactions and make sure that every presser is covered, make sure that every statement from every player is covered. Really important journalism that I'm just not good at. And like what journalists do. Yeah, that.
Right. We just have the lowercase J.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, a lot of it is, trying to break down film and anticipate what's going to happen or explain what's already happened and stuff like that. And, unsurprisingly, Peterson doesn't discuss that very much on the podcast. So I don't listen to the podcast very much. It's really fast. It's a really good podcast. Like, I've heard a lot of player podcasts. I don't think anything can beat Hawkins and Joe Thomas. That was phenomenal.
They were great. I think Will Compton and Taylor Lewan do a great job together too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And I don't know if I would put Peterson's podcast all the way up there, but it's up there. It's like a good player podcast. There's like a bunch of bad ones out there, right? Which is fine. The reason that we have the jobs that we do is because we've cultivated this particular skill set, and they have the jobs that they do because they've cultivated a far more valuable one. And so if they could just not be good at podcasts, I'm very comfortable with that. But his is pretty good. I don't have very much time to do that while I'm trying to watch, the QB school and learning about quarterbacking from JT O'Sullivan, or watch or read Brandon Thorne stuff, over at Trench Warfare, and learning about kind of offensive line play. It's how I devote my time. And if you're doing kind of the more traditional journalism stuff, it makes a lot of sense to be listening to his podcast. So I don't do that. Other journalists do. Sometimes he'll say some stuff that's worth bringing up. They'll bring it up in pressers, and that's when I learn about it. So that's kind of cool. And it doesn't really ever conflict. It just kind of adds to the media environment. It adds things to cover. It adds things to storylines. It brings in new storylines. It's never something where we feel like, we got scooped by his own podcast, which I believe did technically happen once, but it's just like not that competitive in that way. As for kind of how they'll handle the Eagles receiving group, we have no information yet because they covered a bunch of backups, right? Like to be harsh as possible to the Green Bay receiving core, they were out Allen Lazard in that game. So they were left with, Sammy Watkins and Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson and Randall Cobb. And after Christian Watson dropped that first pass, Rodgers wasn't even going to look at him. In fact, he looked at him twice. Watson was wide open against Peterson, which doesn't say a lot about Peterson. But he was open twice, and Rodgers just declined to throw it. It's just like, well, okay. That's going to make your numbers look great.
He's not going on the ayahuasca trip next week.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, man, we're not road tripping to open any chakras until you figure out how to catch the ball.
Your ticket to Peru is canceled. Miles Teller sold your room in the Airbnb.
These personalized tarot cards out.
Tattoo appointment canceled.
But yeah, until Christian Watson can earn back the trust of Aaron Rodgers, which I don't know if you saw any of the quotes about Amari Rodgers today, but it sounds like Amari Rodgers has not done that either yet. It's not going to be a comparable situation to be able to go up against somebody like Devontae Smith, who had a really phenomenal year last year, or AJ Brown, who is just a very good receiver, right? Like I can't really tell based off of what's happened thus far. Especially because the closest thing we have to that is the joint practices the Vikings had against the 49ers. Just Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel were just different types of receivers, right? Like the fact that Patrick Peterson didn't have the ability to handle Brandon Ayuk very well tells me very little about how his ability to handle AJ Brown will go. So I expect that the Vikings will continue to play in the Fangio Staley style. I think that they're more likely going to play sides instead of following anybody around, because I think that if you overfocus on somebody like AJ Brown because Devontae Smith didn't have any receptions, whatever, you're just going to get burned by Devontae Smith, right? Like that doesn't tell me anything about Smith. I expect him to continue to be a high-level receiver. So I think that they'll, maybe rotate some coverages to put a little bit more emphasis on covering Brown. But I think that for the most part, they're going to be a matchup zone defense. It's going to play quarter, half, or threes or quarter. I mean, they play a bunch of different coverages. They look like they come out of too high every snap. They'll play a bunch of different zones, and I expect that to continue without a particular emphasis on matchups. And I think that for the most part, they will primarily be concerned about making Jalen Hurts throw it all as opposed to run, because even though Hurts seemingly has improved as a passer, I still am more comfortable with him throwing the ball than running.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question. Vikings defense matching up against a mobile Jalen Hurts last week. For some ungodforsaken reason, he ran 17 times, leading the team in rushing attempts, which is just crazy. But knowing that
last year, like how many rushes did running backs have last year, man?
It felt like the season from last year just continued when I saw the NFL tweet saying the Eagles racked up over 200 yards on the ground to beat the Lions, and I said, oh, here we go again. Our quarterback should not be running 17 times a game. His name's not Lamar Jackson. But
dude, I drafted him on my teams, man. Keep it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's great when it works, and it helped us win that game. But throughout a duration of a 17-game season, I don't want to see Jalen Hurts, averaging, 17 attempts a game when he can still throw the ball down the field, as proven when he got the ball 155 yards worth to A.J. Brown the entire game. But knowing that he has that ability to run, kind of extend plays, how does that kind of match up with what the Vikings defense is able to do, and how do you think they'll approach Jalen Hurts knowing that he is multifaceted?
Well, I think part of that is I think 9 of his 17 attempts or something like that were scrambles. So there is that, right? Like that's part of it. The rest, of course, were designed in some way, whether it was a direct quarterback run or an option, which is kind of what I saw more of. I think that they're going to have to change their rush plan significantly, because against the Packers, they were really comfortable with a wide variety of attack angles, spinning and twisting and having all kinds of stunts, or attacking with, 2 guys on one side of the line really out wide to to kind of mix things up. And if you do that, you create a bunch of rush lanes, which Aaron Rodgers said after the game, right? Like I should have taken some of those. I didn't. I should have scrambled for a little bit. I bet we're not going to hear Jalen Hurts say that for a while, right? And so if you create rush lane opportunities and the receivers are covered, I mean, he's just going to go because he can get 15 yards on one of those, right? And when you're young and not beat up, you don't really think like I'm gonna hear about this 3 years from now when my body creaks. You just think I need a first down, right? And so in this game, the Vikings need to make sure that they're much more disciplined in the run lanes than they were against the Packers because it didn't matter against the Packers. And how they organize that front, I suspect will look a lot different. And I think that they'll play maybe a little bit tighter. They'll play a lot of more traditional 3-4 stuff as opposed to what they were doing in this game, where they were much more exotic in the way that they were deploying those fronts. And so I think that they want to maybe not two gap as much, right? They still want to be able to rush the passer on passing downs, but I think that they want to clog up those lanes and be biased in favor of making runs difficult or making scrambles difficult more than doing really classic penetration type stuff. Basically the way LSU handled Johnny Manziel, all those years ago. So I think that that's probably kind of the approach that they'll take there, and they'll take the hit when it comes to the amount of pressure that they produce. They only blitzed 4 times. I think that they had a blitz rate by sent 5+ rushers, right? Sometimes they drop some defensive linemen. You call that blitz if you want when you send non pass rushers to rush the passer, but they only sent 5 or more 4 times. So 91% of their pass rushing snaps only involve 4 or fewer rushers. I bet that'll change. I bet they'll blitz a little bit more often, just to find ways to create pressure without sacrificing running lanes. And I think that might be the approach that they end up taking.
Now, I know you're big in the analytics side of the game. I'm big on the jersey analytics side of the game, which is if your jersey looks terrible, you're not going to play really well. And when I tapped into seeing highlights and everything of the Vikings and Packers game and seeing Dalvin Cook actually changed his number to number 4, I wanted to throw up because it looks absolutely terrible. So I don't know how I'm feeling about Dalvin Cook's projected season this year. He is on my fantasy team, so I want him to do well. But the number 4 threw me for an absolute loop, and I said, Dalvin, what are we doing?
He looks faster in 4 than he does in 33. You got to take that into account.
That's true, but he does look more, I guess, bouncy and more,
Oh yeah, for sure.
In 33, kind of being able to shift between the tackles and everything. But I saw the 4 and I said, "Who is that?" And then I realized it was Dalvin Cook, and I was like, "Oh,
the backup changed his number 2. The backup changed to 2."
Oh my gosh!
Apropos, I guess.
Yeah, it was like, oh wow, he actually went through with the thing that they were going to charge him boatloads of money to do last year.
Right. Yeah. So you just did it for free.
Yeah. What do you think Dalvin's going to be able to do in this game, knowing, like we talked about with the Eagles, front 7, and they actually have formidable linebackers this year for the first time, I think, in my lifetime. It's weird.
I don't like that.
I think for the first time since 2004 when Jeremiah Trotter was on the team, this is the first time we've actually had good linebackers. But what do you think Dalvin's role will be in this game, and how do you think, Kevin O'Connell will try to utilize him to at least try to take advantage of knowing that the Eagles front 7 is formidable, could stop him from, gaining yards on the ground? Do you think they'll use him in the passing game at all, or do you think it'll, be one of those things where they kind of try to change his run lanes a little bit?
I think it'll be kind of a mix. I think what was really interesting to me in this game is that the Vikings played gap style runs almost as when Dalvin Cook was on the field, almost as often as they did zone style runs, which threw me for a loop because they've been practicing zone. Almost all off season. The Rams are famously a zone team. So it was really surprising that that's the approach that they went with. And I think that was just because, the reason that a lot of teams have been switching to the Fangio style defense or have been employing those kinds of fronts is because it's actually really good against zone running, especially the type of outside zone that the Rams run. And it really makes it difficult for, your play side guard, just by the way that you play your nose tackles and under tackles, the play side guard to get up to the second level and really secure things, just the way that they have those fronts set up. So the Vikings were just like, well, we don't like have to do that. We can just we can just run power, and that play side guard is now a pulling guard, and now that defensive tackle has nothing to do, or is just kind of out of position in this way. And so I think that that's going to be part of it, is that they're going to complicate those looks based off of how the Eagles decide to organize their front, which the Eagles, I expect throughout the years, probably going to be the most versatile front in the NFL in that regard, in terms of how often you see not just like 4-3 and 3-4 under, over, or whatever, but just kind of seeing the multiplicity of unique fronts, like tight fronts, mint fronts, bear fronts, whatever you want to call those interesting ones up front where you've got like 3-over-3. I expect the Eagles are going to do that, and I think that the Vikings might audible into and out of runs based off of the fronts that they see, just so that they can get kind of the most advantage possible when it comes to that sort of thing. And then you'll have to see, like, hey, is my linebacker going to be, or is my guard going to be quick enough to take on Hassan Reddick? Right? Is the fact that TJ Edwards can recognize plays before they happen going to be a problem? Right? Like, is that, those kinds of questions will have to be answered during the game, and they'll make those adjustments. And then I think outside of that, being able to get Dalvin Cook a little bit more involved in the passing game, that's been a goal of theirs, and something that I think that they're going to commit to in a really big way. I think that that's just going to be kind of another one. We'll see how this matchup goes, and if this matchup continues to be kind of profitable for us, we'll keep going after it, and if not, we'll shut it down. But I think that that's something that they're just going to kind of experiment with and see if it works.
I do find it interesting that you brought up Vic Fangio's name a couple times. He was with the Eagles in training camp, just visiting. I don't know
Hanging
why,
out,
but
chilling.
it's like, hey, when Gannon gets out of town, I'm taking his job.
I'm free. I don't know if you know that. I'm free.
I'm no longer Mile High. And unlike the guy that replaced me, I can hack it.
Hey.
Who do you think is kind of going to be the X factor in this game for the Vikings if they are to, go on and win on Monday night? And, who do you think for the Eagles side of things, from what you've been able to kind of, pick apart, do you think will be somebody that could give the Vikings some headaches and potentially cause them to lose their first game of the year?
I think on the Vikings side, it might be Dalvin Tomlinson. If we're going to avoid kind of the obvious ones, like the pass rushers and Justin Jefferson and all that, I think it'll be Dalvin Tomlinson, because his ability to kind of shut down the run, and his newfound ability to rush the passer, I guess, kind of surprised me. I think that's going to be really big in terms of making sure that the Eagles don't design an offense around the stuff that they want to do best, right? And so having Tomlinson either line up at defensive end, which sure, it worked, so why not, right? I can't knock it too much. Or having him line up at nose tackle, or having him line up as a four technique, whatever. His ability to kind of get in the backfield or squeeze rushing lanes or create uncomfortable situations. You wouldn't necessarily call it a pressure, but create an uncomfortable situation for the backfield, I think is going to be really critical for the Vikings. And he could end up coming away with only like one tackle in the game or something like that, and still have ended up having a tremendous game just from his ability to kind of do those things. Like, the Vikings have already gotten really good at doing stuff like recognizing when something is play action, when something is a screen, all that, which is really fantastic given kind of the veterans that they have up front. But they still need to win those matchups, even when they do recognize that. And Dalvin Tomlinson was, frankly, to me, I thought he was had a remarkable game. I don't think he had that many tackles in this game. So I think he is going to be an X factor in that regard, especially against a team that wants to run the ball a little bit more. So on that side of the ball. On the Eagles side of the ball, it's tough for me, because I just feel like the obvious ones are the only ones, right? Which is not to kind of shut down some of the more underrated players in the Eagles, but it's like, either this name, and this name because they matter, or you don't know this name, and you don't know this name because we kind of got a lot of questions about them, right? And so it's really tough for me to pick an X factor. I guess I'd be reaching if I said Quez Watkins. Let's do
I like that though.
Let's do Boston Scott. Let's get somebody who's got a little bit of everything going for him, who can be kind of a I don't know if change of pace is the right word, right? Because like, everyone kind of knows who he is, and the Eagles tend to have like a cadre of running backs that can do a lot of different things at once. So I don't want to say that like he is a complete change of pace, but I mean, like, he ran a 4.4. He seems to actually be faster than a 4.4 guy. Jordan Hicks is not who he was when he played with the Eagles, and it's been tough for the Vikings to win on the perimeter. So if Boston Scott has a big game, I think that that's going to be a huge issue for the Vikings, because it'll mean that they haven't been able to shut down the perimeter. It'll mean that they can't match up against running backs that are running wheel routes or anything like that. It'll mean that they just can't deal with that kind of speed when they have so many, rush lanes that they have to account for. So I'm going to go with Boston Scott. Plus, when he has big games, it's like fun. Like
he's doing like the head dances in the end zone and everything.
Right.
He's like 5'8",
which he had like a goal line carry last week, right? What was up with that?
It's just a vulture of a touchdown. I want to know if anybody out in the universe parlayed Jalen Hurts, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, and Miles Sanders to score a touchdown last week, because I feel like they would have bankrupt any sports book if they did that. Because Miles Sanders hadn't scored a touchdown since December 27th, 2020 until last week, which is insane. Absolutely insane. The famous Cowboys Ben DiNucci game was the last time Miles Sanders scored.
All right. The submarine pitcher on the field.
Absolutely insane. Yeah, him and Matt Stafford. I've incorporated something on this show since the last time you were on. I always ask our guests just a fun, quirky question poised around, the team that they cover and things they do. And obviously, you're on the Norse Code podcast. So if you had to pick a member or two of the Minnesota Vikings to actually write the actual Norse Code, who do you think would write it the best and why?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I assume by the Norse Code, you mean like a set of guidelines or rules rather than like a cryptographic.
Yeah.
Man. Okay. So I think the classic answer would probably be somebody like Eric Kendricks, maybe Harrison Smith. I think a lot of people would go Adam Thielen. I think he's a little bit spicier than people realize. But I know who I don't want the answer to be. The answer should not be Kirk Cousins. I think that everyone kind of, right. Like that's, I guess if we want to like embody both the Vikings, the team, and the Vikings, like the ethos of Norsemen, I guess probably Harrison Smith, I think is probably the best one, right? Not only does he have the aesthetic and the haircut and all that, he really kind of embodies like potentially toxic, do your job, be quiet about it attitude that seems to like fill our conception of a Viking, right? Maybe it's not healthy from a mental health perspective to do that, but I mean, in terms of the way that we think about Vikings, certainly he seems to have it. Plus, I mean, he still hits like a train, right? I feel like that's got to be part of the attitude that you're bringing into it, right? Like, you do it right, you're Harrison Smith. You do it wrong, you're Andrew Sandejo, right? Like there is,
his corpse is still at Lincoln Financial Field from 2017.
Relax. Vikings have a winning record against the Eagles since then? I think so.
They might. They won when it mattered.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true.
Plus, if Kirk Cousins...
Has anyone else put the Rocky statue in a different team's uniform, or has it just been Vikings fans?
That's a good question. There's been teams that have... There was definitely someone else that did it, and everyone always pulls up that group of Vikings fans that was really like 25 people that they made it look like 2,000 with their drone, and says like, hey, look what happened the last time someone did this.
Propaganda is an art, man. Yeah.
It's all about perspective.
Literal sense.
Plus,
no, I think the Vikings fans should do it again, right? Because either they do it and they win the game and it just washes kind of the karmic retribution, or they do it and you lose the game and then there's this really cool piece of lore for the city of Philadelphia to have, right?
Yes. Like
that just feels right.
Yeah. And I could see somebody doing it, just be like, hey, look, we're doing it again.
Right. Yeah. It's like a fun little way to attach the team to the sport, to the fictional hero that I guess Philadelphia has.
Hey, we love Sylvester Stallone. What can we say? And even, to go back to us not wanting Kirk Cousins writing the literal Norse code, I think the only words that would be written in there would be, if we die, we die. Which is very Viking-esque.
Right. So if you write it down and you call it the Norse code, that sounds really hard, right? That sounds so cool. But like for Kirk Cousins, it's like, yeah, I guess I'll die. I don't know. Right. Like it was not meant as like this really hardcore, like I'm gonna do what needs to be done. And if I'm dead, I'm dead, but I did what needs to be done. And for Kirk Cousins, it's like, I'm not gonna get vaccinated.
Just put me in a plexiglass box. I'll do that.
Yeah. I'll do anything for this team.
Except.
Not that.
Hey, him and Carson Wentz have something in common.
Salt of the earth.
Oh, just grit, guys. Pure grit.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure having you on the show, Arif. Let everybody know where they can check your stuff out at The Athletic, follow you on social media, and check out your podcast as well.
Yeah. So you can find me at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif Hasan. I'm going to have a piece attempting to preview the game, try to predict what the Vikings will do, both on offense and defense, up soon, hopefully Thursday morning, but I take a long time to write things. You can find me on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. I'm not really on any other social. And you can find my podcast. I'm on the Minnesota Football Party with Locked On Minnesota Sports, as well as you mentioned Norse Code, which, the Locked On Minnesota Sports one is like roundtable. We mostly just discuss the Vikings. Norse Code is a lot of Vikings and a lot more, time for depth because we don't have like standards or professionalism. And then a bunch of stuff after that, which has nothing to do with sometimes even football. We talk about beekeeping, food, travel, parenting. I don't have kids, but they always ask me for parenting advice. So,
That's incredible.
Yeah. It's all hogwash. I encourage you to listen to it.
And it was great seeing you log on and you're no longer a hexagon.
Right. Yeah, I'm done with the hexagon arc. I'm a former hexagon. I guess my current thing is not a psyop, which I feel like I get a lot of questions. I get more questions now that I say I'm not a psyop than it's on the shirt, man.
What do you mean by that?
But yeah, we're done with hexagons. Hexagons are over. Circle profiles are back in. And I'm probably going to change it like next week. So,
and I think the board apes are at the bottom of the ocean with the Viking ships.
Yeah, all the apes gone. We've at least dug up some Viking ships. Like that's
true.
Yeah. So to Vikings Longships 1, board ape 0.
No perfect way to end it there. Appreciate you coming on, Arif, and Monday night's going to be an absolute blast. I'm sure we'll be talking about it on Twitter. So
absolutely, man.
Big thank you to the homie Arif Hasan for hopping on the podcast this week. That might go down as a Hall of Fame podcast episode in our company's history. It was an absolute blast. So many fun jokes, so much to unpack in an episode with Arif. We always have a blast chopping it up during Eagles-Vikings week, and that was just an all-time episode that I think I'll remember for quite some time. So make sure you guys are following us at Underground PHI, Twitter, Instagram. Follow Arif. Make sure you're checking out everything he's doing covering the Minnesota Vikings. Get an Eagles enemies perspective from Arif all week long leading into Monday Night Football. And subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast feed, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. It goes a long way with helping more people find the show, come underground, and enjoy the content we are pumping out for the people. And subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. You get full video episodes, like I said at the top of the show, of Eagles enemies and every Underground Sports Philadelphia podcast on our YouTube channel. So smash that subscribe button, click the like button, ring the bell icon, comment down below your predictions for this matchup. And Monday night is going to be an absolute doozy of a game. Eagles-Vikings. Something's got to give, like we said in the episode. Kirk Cousins, 2-9 on Monday Night Football in his career, and the Eagles since 2016 have not won a Week 2 matchup on their schedule. So one of those things is going to continue, and hopefully it's Kirk Cousins dropping to 2-10 on Monday Night Football. But this has been another episode of Eagles Enemies, presented by Underground Sports Philadelphia. Big thank you again to my buddy Arif Hasan for hopping on the show this week. Monday night, let's have ourselves a game. And until next week, it's always Go Birds.